Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, we're returning to John Ford country, the American Western, and we're looking at his 1926 film, Three Bad Men. After the triumph of the Iron Horse, it might be a little bit difficult to conceive of where Ford would go in silent film Western, but he was a man of almost infinite resources, and this, the Western, was his territory. We'll be looking at some of the recurrent motifs of the Ford Western, the importance of the Western in American culture in the 20th century, and a set of other things after today's screening. It's a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque Geoffrey O'Brien, a well-known film critic who's also the editor-in-chief of Library of America. Now, take this opportunity to look once again into the Western landscape of John Ford in Three Bad Men. Welcome back to City Cinematheque, into our modest studios, quite a contrast with the landscapes you've just been visiting for the last 2 hours. This film, Three Bad Men, like all of Ford's Westerns, is an extraordinarily rich repository of artistic achievement and of cultural materials. It's a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque the well-known writer, Geoffrey O'Brien, who's also editor of the Library of America, but is also known for his writings about movies. These include his book, The Phantom Empire, Movies in the Mind of the 20th Century, his recent novella about the effect of movies, The Times Square Story, and I'm happy to say that you've been collected, Geoffrey. You've been collected in The Best American Movie Writing of 1999, edited by Peter Bogdanovich, and our viewers can find there your review, suspiciously enough, or more accurately, your assessment, suspiciously enough, of a John Ford Western as the greatest American film of the 20th century. So I guess that gets you credentialed
well.
On this. In your essay, you write about what is one of Ford's best-known films, the legendary The Searchers. The film we're talking about is made almost 30 years before that, but it's nowhere near the first Western that Ford's been making. Clearly, there's The Iron Horse, a very famous film as well, that precedes it by about 2 years. But where is Ford at the time of Three Bad Men in his career in making Westerns?
Well, astonishingly enough, Three Bad Men was his 49th Western. That's from 1917 to 1926. Many of those were two-reelers, and sadly, almost all of them are now lost. So we really have to judge them by a couple that have survived. But this kind of career is now almost unimaginable, of course, and the fantastic experience that he was able to get by going out on location, working with tremendous freedom, free largely from studio constraints, and basically just learn everything about making movies, so that by the time of Three Bad Men, he's already an absolute technical master of really every element. And at the same time, he's completely relaxed and spontaneous. So, you know, there's nothing of the sense of a set piece. Everything feels as if it's done pretty much off the cuff.
Now, one of the things is that there is a kind of, certainly we recognize it for the late films, but there's a kind of Ford company, a set of people. We can talk later about a set of, themes and structures and all that, but there's a set of people. One of the things that was true was he kept going out, but he kept going out with a lot of the same people.
Yes.
And so that they develop both this ease and this relationship with him. We all know that in any relationship, after a while, you communicate in, in different ways. But I'm always amazed at how the acting looks in these films in comparison to the acting one in certain other American films of the era, but certainly to what film acting looked like, say, even 10 years before. What do you think sort of role Ford has in that, and this kind of production technique or system that he's in?
Well, I think you can see it in the demeanor of the three bad men. They come into this movie as this kind of life force. They're these kind of swaggering, sprawling characters who just move right through the thing and make everybody else look a little bit stiffer by comparison, right. Especially the remarkable Sheriff Lane Hunter, who really is one of the most extraordinary characters in Ford, a kind of proto-Liberty Valance with that enormous white hat. So that the confrontation between him and Bull Stanley when they first encounter each other is really like the encounter of two acting styles.
Yes. And no, he uses these actors in this way that's a total sense. He has a concept of them that has to do with movement, and that has to do, in a one sense, today, one of the things that we trying to give every individual credit, one of our impulses as Americans who believe in the balance of democracy and individualism is we're against stereotypes. Yet on the other hand, Ford is one of those people who understands the value of certain forms of stereotyping visually. Now, when he's at his best, he doesn't just stop there.
Well, it's a kind of shorthand that enables him to draw in an extravagant amount of material. And it should be said, this movie was cut. It was, I don't know how much longer, but quite a bit longer. It was cut after the initial previews, so there are some gaps in the plot which are apparent. We never hear much about that map to where the gold is. But even so, the density of plotting and the population of characters is amazing. It's absolutely teeming with people, and they keep arriving all through the movie.
Yes, that's.
I mean, you have the preacher, you have the immigrant tailor, and you have that ridiculous fop with the derby and the cane, who sort of is the comic relief in the center of the movie.
Well, there's also the way in which, for Ford, the Western really is a canvas of a communal portraiture, and he really wants to get as many characters into that canvas as possible, because while he will deal with individual characters, and certainly the end of the film we have the remarkable sequence in which each of the three bad men gets his confrontation with the bad with the bad guys. Really, Ford is also very, very much dedicated to giving us a portrait of people in larger interaction.
Well, what I love about this film is it begins on an epic scale. We get the ships bringing the immigrants to America, which is a wonderful insert that just gives the whole movie this scope. And then you have some remarkable shots of the Indians seeing the arrival of the white settlers. And again, this is not developed any further in the movie, but it establishes the scope that we're working in. And then he brings it down to earth. He has both the ability to create an epic and the ability to really make it intimate and work almost against the feeling of epic, and bring in low comedy, bring in all kinds of, in this movie in particular, amazing intimate scenes that are dealt with in a couple of shots. The idea that the sheriff is going to hand his girlfriend over to his henchman.
Oh, yes.
And this is just one tiny little scene. It lasts a couple of seconds, and it's absolutely horrifying. There are a great many scenes like this in the movie.
Well, one of the things that I must say, when I first saw, as a child, mind you, Ford Westerns, was that there were so many different layers within the visual information that he's giving us, that in a certain sense, if a child doesn't want to see or can't understand certain things, it's not there. But the degree to which, I don't know if the word prostitute is ever used to name anyone in a Ford film. But when you're looking at a film like this, and you see, and the young woman comes, she says, "Oh, am I going to have to still stay with them?" And you go, and it's obviously a shot of the inhabitants of a brothel, and the set of inferences he leads you to make. what is the relationship of this girl's innocence to this? Is this some form of procurement, you know?
Well, the beauty of silent movies is that so much doesn't have to be spelled out in words. So, in fact, there's this tremendous freedom. And one of the things I love about this movie is it really is all over the place. It covers so much ground, both socially and just in terms of the development of the plot, such as it is, so that at the end you have essentially three amazing set pieces, one after another.
Right.
The attack on the church,
right.
which really would be sufficient for most movies, followed immediately by a land rush scene, which is pretty astonishing, with all of those just random little shots, like the guy on the one-wheel bike, and of course the baby being lifted in the nick of time, and then that incredible ritualistic ending where each of the heroes has a separate death. And of course, as I was watching, I was also thinking about the fact that in that era, Westerns were such a global phenomenon. A movie like this could go everywhere in the world. There was no obstacle. So that you can imagine Kurosawa, for example, who would then have been about 16 years old, watching this and maybe, you know, reacting to those wonderful silhouettes on the rim of the hill and all of these heroic compositions, not to mention that self-sacrificing ending, or Brecht in Berlin, who was working on Mahagoni, and all of those scenes of the lawless, corrupt town, which feed right into that. So it's not just an American phenomenon.
Well, it becomes really a global mythology, and one of the things we'd actually talked a little bit about in our discussion a week before, we were talking about the Iron Horse, is the way in which the Western becomes this repository as a form for working out, you know, at a certain distance, and you know, a lot of the issues about where did we come from? Now, not only where did we come from as Americans, but as America, you know, emerges as this powerful, urban, industrial country, everybody in the world is sort of asking this question. You know, to put it in the jokey way of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, who are those guys? And the Western is the genre above all else that allows people to explore what the character is, or at least how Americans want to continue thinking about themselves, or how they want to mythologize their origins. And I think your point about a global culture is a you know, particularly apt one, because it's not just the person sitting in Chicago or Philadelphia or even a San Antonio who's watching a Western and saying, okay, I'm beginning to understand, you know, this, but it's somebody in Berlin and Sao Paulo and Tokyo who's doing this as well. And it becomes really a kind of there's no single film that many films have you know, are a repository of all the key motifs, but it's not as if any single film summarizes everything of the genre, because the genre, like all genres, keeps negotiating and adjusting itself.
Well, with Ford, I think in his major films, and I do consider this a major film for him, there's always so much going on, and so much of it is actually contradictory. He revels in setting things up and then really undermining them at the same time, so that you get this romantic story, and then underneath that, there is actually a fairly down-to-earth and often rather bitter picture of what it's really like. I think, in fact, there is not a great deal of romanticizing that goes on in this movie beyond the heroic figures of the three bad men, who are like these kind of fairy tale redeemers who come into the movie. But everything else that's going on is pretty squalid, and there are really no illusions about what these people are looking for. They're trying to grab the land from the Indians and get rich.
Oh, and the sense of this being a place that has been, how shall I put it, pre-populated with corruption, that this is, there are people who come with the notion of converting something, but they're not converting something that is blank yet. It's been populated with the wrong kind of people, clearly from Ford's point of view, but the force of that and what it takes, you have the fact they just say, oh, I'm just so tired of that Bible handling preacher guy. Let's just go massacre them all. And you have it's an amazing.
The shots are.
The
glee with which they set about that is pretty scary.
And we have the scene of the church, the church burning, the sense of entrapment. We have the woman killed in front of the church with the burning cross, which is not related to Klan imagery as it's related to the sacrilege of nothing. Nothing is beyond their sense of power, and that they can simply wipe out all decency and restore the world to the depravity that they enjoy. How do you relate this film to Ford's? Or let me put it another way: does Ford develop as a maker of westerns, or is he much more involved in just a set of variations that we wouldn't call exactly developmental?
Well, what strikes me when I think about the really great westerns that he made, from the late 40s especially, into the early 60s, what strikes me is how very different those movies are from most other westerns. They really don't conform very closely to the genre. I'm thinking of My Darling Clementine, Fort Apache, Wagon Master, which for me is maybe the greatest of them. The Search is maybe a greater movie, but Wagon Master somehow is absolutely the epitome of what Ford was about as a filmmaker. And then, of course, The Searchers, Two Rode Together, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which could almost be a silent movie. If you look at this and then think of Liberty Valance, you can just picture it, put in the intertitles and Ransom Stoddard, young lawyer, Mr. James Stewart. And, it's really, in that sense, there's this incredible continuity, and he remains very faithful to his roots in the silence. But I think also there's amazing development going on, and obviously My Darling Clementine is very different. The Searchers is altogether different. But what he remains true to is that amplitude and that freedom to bring in disparate elements, to break the mood, to very radically have low comedy or musical numbers up against horrible carnage, tragedy of all kinds. And he doesn't care about neatness of structure. He cares about a certain cohesion which comes out of all that. Which is immensely satisfying.
In that sense, I really think he does fit into, and this is part of his American-ness, he really fits into this sort of panoramic, additive tradition of American art that I think we associate in literature with a Whitman. There are just going to be more leaves of grass. Or that, in the 20th century novel, while somebody like Faulkner is clearly a formal genius with novelistic form, it just gets more sprawling, and things are sort of related from this late novel to something he did 25 years earlier. And Ford has that kind of expansive oeuvre.
Yeah, and as we were saying before, it has everything to do with the fact that his technical mastery is so absolute that permits him to be very, very laid back and to do these things. For example, there's that scene in Two Rode Together where Jimmy Stewart and Richard Widmark are talking by the side of the river for what seems like a very long time in one shot. And they thought it was a run-through. He didn't bother to tell them that he was actually filming. And he did this all the time. This was standard practice for Ford to just kind of, we're just going to have a rehearsal. And he didn't rehearse. He would just film it and as often as not get it in the first take, including elaborate action scenes. I think if you look at that land rush scene, it has a ragged quality. This is not, the kind of set piece that you find in William Wyler, say. This is just very much just let it happen and just shoot it.
Well, it's interesting because there's a way in which, in a certain sense, Ford is the ultimate model for an American filmmaker, and there's of course the famous quotation from Orson Welles. How Mr. Welles, how did you prepare for Citizen Kane? I study the old masters, and by that I mean John Ford, and John Ford. But there's a way in which he goes very much against the grain, certainly of much contemporary Hollywood filmmaking, because if you are looking in the film magazines or whatever, and you see these advertisements, for the books, for the seminars, etc., we'll show you exactly what the exact structure is for Hollywood film, and all you have to do is pay us $1,000 and spend a weekend at the Holiday Inn with us.
No, he doesn't respect that kind of structure at all. He's perfectly capable of it.
Exactly.
And of course, The Searchers is a uniquely, beautifully structured film, as it happens. Every now and again, he works with that kind of material, but not necessarily. Fort Apache, movies like that are remarkably sprawling, and they go off into digressions. They allow themselves to really, take 10 minutes off and do something different. We'll take you into the family life of these characters who aren't even the main characters of the movie necessarily.
Well, and that's because he gets so interested in, really, he's interested in American culture and the things that he views as the sustaining features, even when they're contradictory in the culture. And that's why you have all of these scenes in his films that, according to certain kind of rule books, don't forward anything, but they reveal what he thinks the essence of the characters are, or they reveal what he sees as an important thing in sustaining the community in one way or another. And that's when people are working together, or they're eating together, or they're dancing together in some way, or they're going to church together. And these are the kinds of things that recur over and over again throughout his films. Now, what about this notion in this film that we have? This film is, while it's sprawling and it goes all over, it is a little bit strange that we end up having two sets of heroes. We have a standard hero, and then we have the three bad men, and then we have a very eccentric sort of an antagonist character. What kind of fun do you think Ford is having with that?
Well, Bull Stanley is an amazing character, and it's actually interesting to think of that part being played by John Wayne, because it's made for him. This bitter loner who is both an outlaw and a totally virtuous human being. And that shot where he goes into his tent, and it's just a long shot that contemplates him, and that is clearly the center of the movie. Right. This is where you really get to it. And then the later scene where his sister dies and he's carrying her downstairs and they're holding the torches. You have the funeral procession, and then that burial, which is straight out of The Searchers. So I mean, this is, I think, a deep level of Ford. Right. This sense of the absolute outsideness of these three guys, who are, in some ways, well, the sidekicks are comic figures. They have this kind of Shakespearean clown quality. And Bull Stanley as the guy who is never going to fit in, and the most that he can do is to kind of sacrifice himself to make it a little bit easier for the far blander hero and heroine to have their kid and live their life.
Well, and just to talk about the later ones and bring them in, this notion of someone who is able to do the right thing at the right time, but that does not guarantee them a place in the community that they have saved or within the family unit they have saved, is another one of those things that recurs, because even in My Darling Clementine, Wyatt Earp is exiled from the town at the end of it, maybe with a promise of coming back, maybe not, and certainly very famously in The Searchers, Ethan Evans is once again expelled into the wilderness.
And in a lighter way, in Wagon Master, you have the two cowpokes, Ben Jonson and Harry Carey Jr., who guide the Mormons, but they are not Mormons. They are not going to be part of this spiritual community that they're helping to bring into existence. They just go off somewhere and
Right,
disappear.
and to bring it back just for the moment to Three Bad Men, there's the way in which the George O'Brien character, who is admirable and really quite compelling as a young protagonist, it's as if Ford says, okay, well, we understand how we have young, handsome protagonists, and he works very well, but I'm going to give you the surrogate protagonists as well that really have the weight of the experience behind them, the kind of weight of understanding of what being good in this situation is, in a way in which the George O'Brien character, he learns it. That's why they name the kids for these three.
But he's the pretty one.
Absolutely.
And then you have the sheriff, who's also quite a dude.
Yeah.
And then you have that absurd character with the hat and the cane, who's there just to be the ultimate parody of this kind of foppish image. So the outlaws, they are the real guys, no doubt about it. And they're rough, and they don't fit in, and they absolutely they're a disruptive presence, basically.
Right. Well, and it's interesting the way in which he begins with the single shots of them when he introduces them. And while it would be inaccurate to say that Ford has any interest in really developing them a psychological profile for them at all, he is very interested in developing a broader behavioral profile for them. And that includes, getting to know them and like them, the two minor ones, through their comic variation. And that they really become just charming, and they're not the bad guys promised by the first shot.
Well, the close-ups are beautiful. I mean, that really that ties the movie together. The repeated close-ups of those three actors, and then all the business with the stovepipe hat and the parrot. These just like eccentric little details.
But to talk about this kind of rambling structures that he liked to use, but the way in which he's such a master that something you just think is a throwaway, it is true that he sets up with these initial kinds of close-ups at the beginning that are fascinating and all of that, and then they each get this individualized set piece death, and we come full circle. So they're not all dying together. They're dying both sequentially, but there's a kind of way in which Ford is visually measuring the distance between that first close-up and how we would really judge these good bad men now.
That is an amazing shot. The final moment when the sheriff finally gets killed looks exactly like the death of the vampire in Nosferatu, the body language.
We're going to have to end with that because that's our final shot for the day. If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque, drop us a line. Drop it to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Let me give you that information again. Drop us a line to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Geoffrey, it's a pleasure having you here. Sorry, as always, we only have 30 minutes. We'll come back to your reservoir of knowledge about American film and other things again some other time.
I look forward to it.
Great. Thanks once again for joining us this week, and we hope you join us once again for what we think is the best of classic and international cinema on City Cinematheque. Bye-bye for now.